Okay, so once again, good morning. So we'll continue with our module 3. So in the previous class, we saw linear pipeline and then non-linear pipeline, where we had some reservation stations and also initiations where a particular stage is busy in more than one instance of time, right? Followed by which we also saw what is the best schedule that we can do uh, so that our pipeline the latency is minimized, right? Minimal average latency. Then we also saw something about prefetching, because when you have to do some reordering, instead of focusing on the static schedule, so you wanted to reorder your instructions and schedule it to avoid some dependencies. So when you want to do that, you need to do some prefetching. And in the end, we saw about hazards. So hazards are nothing but your data dependency leading to some violations. Okay, so we saw all that in the previous class. In today's class, we will be seeing more into dynamic scheduling. Okay, how do you do the scheduling dynamically? Instruction scheduling dynamically. Okay, so first thing is about a static schedule. So what is a static schedule? A static scheduling is something that only your compiler can take care of. So by looking at your code, okay, the compiler can optimize certain bit, and then it can do the reordering to some extent. Okay, so that's what your static scheduling does. But the only problem is these compiler optimizations are strictly your uh, dependent on the structure of your program rather than depending on data. Okay, so when you have runtime data, your compiler may not be able to optimize it, right? So that's where the problem comes. So that's why we need a dynamic scheduling. Yeah. Okay. So what is dynamic scheduling? So we actually have a couple of approaches, but what dynamic scheduling means is you actually do the prefetching, right? So you actually bring all the instructions that are ready to be issued, but then you issue them in such a way that as and when the resources are available, you actually give them for execution. Okay, so it's purely dynamic, so you know nobody knows at what time which resource is going to get released, right? So it's not known at the compile time. So inside the processor, inside your inside the CPU, right? So the pipeline itself, you bring in this kind of a schedule. Okay, so that's your dynamic scheduling. And there are two main approaches here. So one is Tomasulo's algorithm. Okay, so this is a very important algorithm. So it's actually set a milestone for computer architecture, and it actually becomes heart of the scheduling. Okay, so this is again a hardware based dependency resolution. So where you have registration the reservation stations, right, available. So these reservation stations dynamically keep track of which functional unit is getting used. Okay, and and schedule it accordingly. So that is how Tomasulo's algorithm works. And another parallel technique is scoreboarding. Okay, scoreboarding is kind of similar to Tomasulo's algorithm, but the only thing is here it's a centralized approach. Okay, so there's a centralized control unit or a scoreboard that you maintain, like a register file, right? So then you actually keep track of which part of your pipeline is busy. Okay, so this is more like a data driven mechanism. So let's look at the static instruction scheduling briefly. So you can take this example, particular example. So as mentioned earlier, static scheduling is performed by the compiler. Okay, it's completely compiler oriented, and the data dependencies create the interlocked relationships. Okay, so you create data dependencies across these instructions. and based on which you actually determine which the instruction should precede which one. Okay, and you also note down the independent instructions, correct? So based on that you can rearrange these instructions and execute it out of order, or you can reorder the instruction and execute. So remember, we actually did one example in the previous class, and we saved some cycles by reordering instructions, right? But who does this reordering? So in static scheduling, it's the compiler who does the reordering. And generally you keep at distance equal to the stage delay, so that you actually fit in the instruction into the pipeline. Okay, so we'll just look at this example. So here you see there's a list of instructions and their associated time delay. Okay, so so here when you see these two loads, right? So the problem even the earlier example we saw was with respect to load, because load takes two cycles, and then where you have to have one stall cycle each, correct? And then this multiply depends on this particular load. Okay, so what you will do is you will actually interleave, like mentioned here, right? So you actually interleave the instruction and then you create some kind of a distance. So what you do is you would actually bring the load above. So because this load is not dependent on any of this add or move, correct? So what you do is you just bring the load to the top, so that while your data is getting loaded from memory to register, you can actually do other things. So you can actually do add and move, which are independent of it. Okay, and by the time your multiply instruction is getting issued, you already have the load completed. Okay, so because of this you will save some cycles, and this can be done statically, right? So you can actually, if your compiler itself can do this. Your compiler can see that, hey, see, this load does not have any dependency. Okay, so you can actually have your compiler work this out and then come up with a new reordered set of instructions without breaking the code. Okay, so that's your static scheduling. However, the problem is you can only do so much, right? So especially when you have some data dependent instructions, so then you need to wait until your code is generated, the actual effective address is generated, and so on. And because of that, the compiler may not be able to accurately give you the reordering. Okay, so that's the problem with static scheduling. The other issue is you may not know which functional unit is currently being used. Okay, even though compiler can give you the ordering, it's very difficult to exactly pinpoint, say, this particular multiplier is free or this particular adder is free. So when we actually have like a huge processor with multiple functional units, it becomes a problem to do that scheduling. Okay, so we cannot go to that granularity. So because of that, we are going to have something called as dynamic scheduling. Okay, so in dynamic scheduling, the first thing we are going to see is Tomasulo's algorithm. Okay, again I'm saying, even from exam point of view, this is a very important algorithm. Okay, this is a very important topic, both Tomasulo's algorithm as well as scoreboarding. Okay, please go through this. It's actually very simple. Okay, so I think you remember this figure from the previous lecture, right? So we saw about reservation station and tagging unit. So what is the idea here? So the idea is you treat every functional unit separately, and these are bunch of functional units. Okay, so you have to think of it as, so this is like set of all adders. Okay, so you will have adder 1, adder 2, adder 3, and so on. So these will be set of multipliers: multiplier 1, multiplier 2, multiplier 3, and so on, right? So you have multiple other units, and you also treat memory like this. You also treat memory like a functional unit. And what you will do is you will have a reservation station for each of these group of functional units. Okay, so these functional units will have their reservation stations. Okay, so there you're going to note down, so which adder is currently being used by whom. Okay, and that is going to be tracked by this tag unit. Okay, so that's the idea here. So it's a hardware based resolution scheme, and you have multiple functional units, and this is particularly developed for floating point units. Okay, that we have to keep in mind, although it is generically applicable to all. So it was generated so that you actually have multiple functional units including floating point units, and memory is also treated as a functional unit, and you use register tagging to allocate and deallocate resources. Okay, the source and destination registers. So you need to know. So actually the idea is whatever compiler was doing, right, so you're doing it dynamically here. Okay, so what you will do is, so you will actually find out from the reservation stations that which functional unit is going to give me the resultant. Okay, and that destination register would be the source for some other, right? So these reservation stations can communicate, so the tag unit keeps track of it, and then it actually diverts. You do a register transfer uh, here in the register file, so that you don't have to wait until you're doing the final write back. Okay, so previously what you do, you actually have a write back stage, but now you don't do that. So what you do is you already have the register file, everything placed in the register. So from directly the destination register, whichever is the destination register, you actually direct that to the other source register. Okay, so that's done dynamically. So the instructions wait in the reservation station until all dependencies are resolved. Okay, so all the instructions, right, after decode and they're issued, they actually come and then sit inside the reservation stations. Okay, but it does not know. It's something like we are waiting for some reservation in our railway station or something, right? It's something like that only. Okay, you wait when you have RAC, you don't know where you will be allotted, so you'll have to keep waiting until somebody gets relieved. Correct. So similar to that. So you have your instructions, your add instruction with a particular source and destination register is here. Okay, and once a particular functional unit releases the register, right? Let us say this functional unit released that register, so the tag unit will come to know of this. Okay, and then and that tag unit is going to get the information from register file, and it's going to say that, hey, okay, for you adder, your source files are ready, so you can be issued. Okay, so you can actually go and start executing. So that is how it is done. Okay, so that everything is taken care internally and dynamically. And then the dispatched, they're dispatched for execution when the operands and the functional unit are available. So that is something very important, right? There are two things why an instruction will wait. Okay, so an instruction here should wait. So let us say add r1, r2, r3. Okay, so now this is going to wait here as long as, I mean, until your R1 and I mean R2 and R3 are ready, right? So you need R2 and R3, the data to be ready. Only if R2 and R3 are released by someone else, then your adder can proceed. Okay, so that until then you have a dependency. And there is another dependency, it's called as a structural dependency, right? It's because you need an adder. So the functional unit adder should be free. Maybe this guy is working on some other addition, okay, and that is not free. Now what will happen is, so the reservation station keeps track of both the things. So it keeps track of the operands, as well as it keeps track of the functional unit. So the adder, as soon as the adder gets free, it releases the results, then the adder becomes free. So then reservation station will come to know that adder is free, and it will start scheduling. So both these conditions should be met. Okay, clear? So that's about your Tomasulo's algorithm. Any questions so far? Is it clear, guys? Hello? Is this clear? Okay. Now we'll take a quick example. So we will just do the simple example, x equals to y plus z. A equals to B plus C. I think we saw this example sometime back too. When you apply this Tomasulo's algorithm, right? So you get some kind of a schedule like this. Okay, so you actually have a dynamic schedule in this sense, and when you measure the time, it actually takes around 13 clock cycles. Okay, so remember, we are only going to take the time where the pipeline is full, the time when the first instruction started executing to the time when the last instruction started executing. Okay, both are started executing only. Okay, so if you calculate the time, it's going to be around 13 clock cycles. The next technique is scoreboarding. Okay, in scoreboarding, the idea is that you have a centralized scoreboard, unlike your Tomasulo's algorithm, where for every functional unit you had a reservation station. Here you have a common a centralized scoreboard, and you have sub pipelines. Okay, you have independent execution pipelines. Okay, so here there is one execution pipeline. This could be for adder, and let us say there is another execution pipeline, and this could be for a multiplier, and this could be for another unit, or it could be another instance of a multiplier or something. Okay, so there are, for every functional unit you have a hardware pipeline. Okay, so, and this scoreboard is a centralized unit that keeps track of who is executing what. So it typically does what the tagging unit did, right? Both, it's a reservation station plus tagging unit combined. It's going to keep track of which pipeline is free and who is and what is it working on. Okay, so it's first implemented in CDC 6600, so that's why it's called CDC scoreboarding. So multiple functional unit as like execution pipelines, and these parallel units allow out of order execution. Meaning your once in your issue stage, right? Your scoreboard will decide, okay, based on which pipeline is free and which operand is free. That is going to say, hey, you go take this pipeline. So it's something like a dynamic queue, right? So where you have the different counters and you dynamically switch between the queues. So it's something like that. And then the scoreboard, you have it's a centralized unit that takes care of routing the data. Okay, so here one thing is, you assume that your data is already available. Okay, by the time you have issued it, it means that you have the operands ready, but only you're waiting for the functional unit. You just have to choose which functional unit to go to based on their availability. Okay, so that's the main difference here. So again, if you take the same example, so this is how scoreboarding technique works. So here, if you take, it's again, it's a kind of similar cycles, right? Like from 4 to 16, it's going to be the same around 13 cycles. Okay, so it really depends on when you're getting the instruction issued. Okay, so you may get it issued at this point of time, but your execute may begin at stage 12 because it's completely dynamic. Okay, so you may actually have the functional unit ready, and then you start executing right away. So it's a completely dynamic scheme, but even after issue you may not execute because you're waiting for the scoreboard to say, okay, now you're ready to execute. Okay, so now this also takes 13 cycles. Okay, so time for a quick quiz. Who wants to go first on this? Let's pick someone. Ashish, are you there? Ashish? Hey Ashish, can you please match the following? Can you answer the quiz here? One, static scheduling. Which one does it match? You can just type. No, one is not C. Static scheduling. What does static scheduling depend on? You can get some help from others. You can ask your friend. Whom do you want to ask? Call out someone, no? Ashish. Yash.
Yes, sir.
Hey, you want to help Ashish?
Sir, 1 will map to B.
Huh? One?
1 to compiler based.
One. Good. Static scheduling is compiler based. Good. Next.
Sir, 2 will map to C.
Okay. Nice. Super.
and and 3 will map to A.
Field map to AI. Great. Nice. Thanks, Yash. Super. Okay. So static scheduling. So this is the key takeaway. Static scheduling is purely compiler based, and dynamic scheduling you have two, right? Tomasulo's and CDC scoreboarding. Tomasulo's algorithm is based on reservation stations and tagging, while scoreboarding has multiple execution pipelines. Okay, and of course a centralized scoreboard. Great, thanks. All right, any other questions, guys? Okay, if not, we'll just move to the next topic. So we'll go to something called as branch handling. Okay, so when it comes to computer program, right? Any program. So previously we saw, correct? So there are only, I mean, whatever be the complex program we see, right? Any supercomputer working on it, or be it your mobile app, any application that you take, fundamentally boils down to only two things, right? So one is your sequential execution, and there is going to be a branch. So this is all your computer science is about. Okay, if you think about it, any computing right application, your computing application finally will boil down to series of sequential instructions. Okay, and at some point you will have a branch. While this branch can actually branch off and then create again another series of instructions, or it can actually also loop back. It really depends, right? But nonetheless, there are only two things. So one is your sequential execution, other one is branch. So now in the sequential execution, previously we have seen, right? So whatever we have seen, the examples so far, they all have to do with your sequential execution, meaning like you have a series of instructions and you're going to reorder this or do a dynamic scheduling of this sequential part. Okay, now what about this branch part? Now that is a difficult thing. Why is it a difficult thing? It's because when you branch, right, especially when you have a pipeline, it's very difficult for you to have a nice pipeline. Okay, let us say you have a program like this, right? So you have a program, and then at some point you're going to do a branch. Okay, it's not a good way to do it. So generally it is going to be like this. Okay, so you have different instructions, and there is going to be one instruction that is a branch. Okay, now that branch is going to deviate from your current series of execution. Okay, so this is exactly how a branch is going to look like. Why did I draw this in a different color is because uh, so all these sequence of instructions, right, you will only have pc equals to pc plus 4. So all these pink ones will have pc equals to pc plus 4. Okay, including this one. Okay, even here, right, if your branch is not taken, you will still continue with pc equals to pc plus 4, and you will have subsequent instruction. Okay, so you will have pc equals to pc plus 4. This will just keep going. Okay, but for the branch instruction, you will have a different pc. Okay, and that is called as the branch target. Okay, it's called as BT, branch target. Your PC will be equals to branch target, a new target. Okay, PC is not equal to PC plus 4 here. Okay, rather it is branch target. Well, this branch target can actually be one of the earlier PCs to where it's a loop, but you don't know, right? So it could be any branch target. So this is fundamentally your entire programming boiled down to. Okay, a series of PC equals to PC plus 4. But at times when you have branching instruction, right? So you may have PC equals to branch target instead of PC plus 4. It could be either ways, and your compiler may not be able to predict this. Okay, so you may have to do it in a dynamic fashion again. Well, compiler can still do to some extent, but you should also go for a dynamic approach here. Okay, so now why is this a problem? Now when you take a pipeline, right? So what we are doing in a pipeline, so you actually have your fetch, and then decode, issue, execute, and then write back, correct? So this is what we had seen earlier. So this is what your pipeline is about. So this is the next instruction: fetch, decode, issue, execute, and then write back. Now let us say that this is a branch instruction. Okay, you're going to branch, but you don't know. When will you know whether it is branching or not? Is only when technically you will come to know only after this stage, correct? When you're executing, only during the execute stage you will come to know, hey, whether I have branched or not. Until then I don't know whether I'm going to branch or not. So this will, you, by that time what you would have done, right? You would have already filled the pipeline, right? One second. So this is your branch target. Okay, so now by this time you would have already filled your pipeline with PC equals to PC plus 4, because you have done your prefetch, correct? Your prefetch would have done uh, PC equals to PC plus 4. Now this is your next instruction, PC plus 4, and this is your PC plus 8. Okay, so these are all the sequential part. Okay, so now, so this is the branch instruction. Okay, so we'll put like a blue circle on top. Okay, and these are your these instructions. Okay, previous instruction, these instructions. Okay, oh, sorry, so this is your branch instruction. Okay, and then these are the subsequent instructions after branch. Okay, so let us say we will call this so here you have IB, right? So this is called as IB, instruction branch. So this will be your IB, and the subsequent instructions, this will be IB plus 1, IB plus 2, IB plus 3, and so on. Okay, however, if the branch is taken, then you will actually have to fetch a new target instruction, right? So that is called as IT. Okay, instruction target, and this will have its own flow. Okay, so you're going to have IT, and then here it's going to be your IT plus 1. Okay, so we will also make this blue. IT plus 1. Okay, IT plus 2, and so on. Okay, now you're actually, you've branched out of your program. Okay, and after this it becomes again a sequential series. This will again become your PC equals to PC plus 4, and so on until you hit the next branch. But anyway, for now, right? So what has happened in your pipeline, you have hit the branch instruction, and until this point you will not know whether it is a branch or not, correct? Now by the time you would have fetched, decoded, and you would have, or you would also be ready to issue the next instruction. Okay, all the pipeline, the subsequent instruction, right? IB plus 1, this is IB plus 1, and this is IB plus 2, and so on, right? Everything else will be filled. But let us say your branch is taken, then what you should do, then you should cancel out all these things. You should say no, you have to flush the pipeline. Okay, you have to flush the pipeline as soon as you come to know that your current instruction is branching. So all your PC equals to PC plus 4 will become obsolete. All these things are done. You have to flush the pipeline. Okay, you flush the pipeline and then you fetch the new instruction. Okay, so the new instruction will be your I BT, right? IT. So your IT will come here. Okay, you're going to fetch your new instruction. Okay, clear? Is it clear, everyone? So this is what will happen when you have a branch. Okay, so whatever instructions you had earlier, you're going to flush because you already have that in your pipeline, but only during the execution stage of your branch instruction you will come to know that you are indeed branching. Then whatever you have already filled in your pipeline, you have to flush and you have to fetch the new instruction. Okay, so that's about your branch. Okay, so that's what is shown here. So your branch, when you have a branch taken, right? So if you have the instruction flow is going to look like this, right? IB, your IB plus 1, IB plus 2, and so on. So this is the current instruction. Okay, and then this is the next instruction, next instruction, next instruction. Okay, so on. And when you have this series, at this point, let us say you have the branch taken, but by the time you actually calculate where my instruction is, I mean whether I'm branching or not, all these instructions are already in my pipeline. They have to be cancelled. Okay, so these have to be flushed. Okay, and this is called as the delay slot. Okay, and this delay slot means how much instructions, how many slots of how many time slots I have actually filled my pipeline with wrong instructions. Okay, so that's the delay slot. Okay, so when a branch is taken, it means, when is a branch taken? A branch is taken when your PC is not equal to PC plus 4, but rather a branch target. So there is something called as a branch target and you're branching to that instruction. If it is PC equals to PC plus 4, then you will go do this, right? Your IB, then you will fetch IB plus 1. This is what you will execute next. Okay, it is branching when this does not happen. A branch is taken when your PC is loaded with a new branch target address. Okay, so now let us look at some of the parameters. K is the number of pipeline stages and N is the total number of instructions. And then let us assume that P is the percentage of branch instructions over N instructions, right? So P divided by N. P is the percentage, okay? And Q is the percentage of successful branch instructions, okay? Now Q is the branch taken out of P. Okay, so P is the total number of branch instruction. You can have many branch instructions, but not all branch instructions will be taken, right? Okay, so if you take your program, in your program there could be like 10% branch instructions, but out of the 10%, probably only 50% of the 10% is going to be taken. Other things may not be taken, correct? So now that is your queue, and let B be the delay slot and tau the pipeline cycle time. Okay, so if this is what it is, then your branch penalty is given by q of p of n. Okay, so p of n is the percentage of your branch instructions, and q of this, right, I told you 50% of the 10%, so like that. So okay, so how much percentage of your branch instruction you are actually branching, and that multiplied by b times tau. B is your delay slot, because that many slots you would have wasted in filling the pipeline and you have to flush it. So that's like a wastage of your time. Okay, you have to flush the pipeline, and tau is the pipeline cycle time. Okay, time for the tau is the stage delay, right? So that one. Now if you work it out, it's going to be this expression, right? P q n b tau. Okay, so now effective execution time you can calculate by using this formula, right? So the T effective is, the blue one is nothing but your pipeline effective execution time, if you remember, K plus n minus 1 times tau. So that's the time taken for a pipeline, okay, plus the branch penalty. Okay, so that's what you have, the effective pipeline time including your branch instructions. Okay, any questions? Is it clear how branch works? Okay, now extending this further, you'll have effective throughput as nothing but n divided by T effective, so which gives you this expression here. And when n tends to infinity, then you actually have another expression. So what do you mean by n tends to infinity? It just means that in a long run, right? So when you have a huge program, okay, so when your n is not a small number, so on a steady state, your computer just keeps running, okay, so then generally you have your n tends to infinity, that the steady state. So in that your expression is like this, okay. Then you also have something called as a performance degradation factor. Okay, so the degradation factor, so how much performance you lose because of branching. Okay, so it's just simple application. So it's actually given by this expression D equals to F minus H effective by F. Okay, so what it says is, so H effective is nothing but the when n tends to infinity, right, in a steady state throughput. So F minus your effective throughput divided by F. So that's the how much degradation you have. Okay, and it's just simple substitution that you have to do here. Any questions so far? Okay, so if not, we'll see how the branches are handled, right? So how do you do this prediction? So first thing is static branch prediction. Static branch prediction just looks at your code and then says, okay, so if this is what it is, so generally, right, it's actually easy if you think about it. Actually, static branch prediction can actually do a good job. Okay, if it's a very if you have simple conditions. So let us say you have a for loop. Okay, so you have a for loop in your C program, I equals to 0, I less than 10, I plus plus, right? It's a simple for loop. So this is how it's going to look like. Your compiler can most certainly say that the first time you are going to go through this, okay, you are going to enter into the loop, correct? And most certainly by the end of the loop, right, so you have a condition, correct, you actually compare. So most probably you are going to take the branch, okay, you're going to branch and then you're going to go into the loop. So in every case, if you have a for loop, right, most of the time, in this particular case, 9 out of 10 times you are going to branch. Okay, correct, isn't it right? And if it actually, if it becomes 100, right, I equals to 100, then it's going to become 99 out of 100 times. 99 out of 100 times I am going to branch at this point, correct? I'm not going with PC equals to PC plus 4 here. Okay, if it's a for loop, most certainly I can say that if it's a for loop, my for loop is going to take a branch. Okay, so that is the static branch prediction. Based on the structure of your code, you can actually say to some extent that you're going to branch. But it becomes a lot more complex when you have multiple conditions and multiple like nested for loop and things like that. When the code becomes complex, then it becomes a little difficult for the compiler. So you need a dynamic branch prediction. And also it depends on your runtime data. Okay, branch on 0, right, you don't know until you actually execute the previous instruction. Now what is the strategy used here is that you have something called as a history. Okay, so branch history. Now you actually I mean, since you guys are familiar with all these machine learning and things like that, right, so where you actually have an existing data. Okay, so you already have a profiled data, and you see a pattern in that. Okay, so if this was the pattern, this is my outcome. Okay, so if you take your supervised learning, right, so that's what you get. So you actually have a already collected data, you have a history, and when this particular pattern or this particular combination occurs, the output is most likely this particular one. Okay, so that is what you do, and then you actually try to train it, and then you do it, right? Very similar approach. It actually these are all inspired from here. Okay, so is a simple profile based history. Okay, prediction. So this is where it all started from. So what you will do is you will actually have the branch instruction address. Okay, and then you get the branch prediction statistics, and then based on that you will say what is the branch target. So previously, when this kind of situation arose, then this was my branch target. Okay, so this is my branch target address. So you store it in a big table. Okay, and based on that you can decide when you can either do it at the decode stage itself. Whenever you get a new instruction, you can say, hey, this instruction, right, if this is the instruction, then for sure it's going to branch to this. You can make a prediction. Okay, when you say sure, it's like with a certain amount of certainty, right? You can say most probably you're going to hit this branch target. The other strategy is to calculate the effective address, right? So you can calculate the effective address. You can use a cache, and then you can say if this is the instruction, especially if you take a for loop, right? In a for loop, most of the time, I mean, not most of the time, the entire for loop, you're going to your target address is going to be the beginning of the loop, correct? That's not going to change. So you can effectively cache that, and then you can do this. The other thing is you can use a cache to store the target instruction at the fetch stage itself. Okay, so the moment you fetch the instruction, you have used the same instruction, okay, from the cache, then most likely you're going to hit the same branch target. Okay, so you can have these three different strategies, and you actually come up with a state diagram. Okay, it's actually very interesting. So you come up with, so this is a little bit okay, I'll just explain this one, right? So here, when you say t, it is taken. Okay, and then n is not taken. Okay, based on, so this is a simple strategy where you are going to say, I'll follow this state diagram to say whether my branch is going to be taken or not. Okay, and then your n is going to be your last two branches not taken. Okay, so here you are considering last two states. So that's the history you're talking about in this. Okay, the next one is last branch not taken and previous is taken. Okay, not taken and then taken, and both are taken. This is last one taken and the previous one is not taken. Okay, so in this state diagram you are considering the history of the last two time slots. Okay, now based on that you're going to come up with some kind of mechanism. You're going to say, intelligently say that, oh, okay, so if I am currently in a not taken state, then most likely I'm going to stay here. So if it is not taken, I'm going to stay in this state. Okay, so this is me predicting like whether the branch will be taken or not. Okay, if the last two states are not taken and the current one is also not taken, then I will stay in this state, which is a not taken state. Okay, and similarly you'll say that, let us say the last one is taken and the previous one is not taken, but this time it is taken, then you actually change the state. Okay, you go to the last one not taken but the previous one is taken. Okay, so here the idea is you actually go from one state. So this is not the only state diagram that is available. You can have a very simple state diagram that will just have like only two states, right? So you'll say taken and it is not taken. I'll say that if my branch is taken, I will stay in this state. Okay, if my branch is not taken, I will go to this state. So here you're using only history of one time slot. Okay, the current instruction, if it is not taken, I'm going to say that even the next branch will not be taken. Okay. So now I can have, if it is in, when I'm in not taken state, if I actually take it, then I'll say I'll change my mind. Oh, okay, okay, next branch it may be taken. Okay, so this is with one state. So if you have two, I mean, if this is one time slot for history, if you have two time slots for history, your becomes a lot more complex. This is not the only state diagram. You can have other state diagrams too. Okay, so basically you come up with a strategy to predict what my next branch target is, and then you're going to say that whether the branch is going to be taken or not taken. Clear? Everyone clear? Is it clear, guys? Okay, if not, I mean, there's no issues, then we'll go to the next one. So we have delayed branches. Okay, so what is delayed branches? So this is similar to your dynamic scheduling, right? So idea is you reduce the branch penalty by shortening or minimizing the delay slot. If you remember, delay slot is the penalty, right? So delay slot is nothing but how much instructions you are actually filling up the pipeline with that needs to be flushed. Okay, you're filling up the pipeline for, let us say, 3 or 4 slots, and it turns out that you are taking the branch, then all these 4 slots should be flushed, correct? So that is your delay slot. Now when you make this delay slot 0, then it means you have reduced the branch penalty. Okay, you just have to flush 0 instructions, which means you're not flushing anything. That's what is important, right? So the idea of delay branch is this: what you will do is you actually insert an instruction that is not dependent on this branch. Okay, so irrespective of your branching, let us say that you have some loop. Okay, let us say you have a loop, something like this, right? So you have instructions and you have a branch here. Okay, now let us say there is an instruction I1 here. Okay, now irrespective of whether you are going to branch or not, the after at some point you will hit this instruction, and then you will definitely run this instruction. If that is the case, then you bring that instruction into the pipeline. Whenever you see a branch instruction, the moment you see a branch instruction, you are going to fetch not the instruction, not necessarily PC equals to PC plus 4, but rather what you will do is you will fetch that instruction that will definitely be executed. Okay, so that will definitely be executed. It could also be something like this, right? So you actually branch and then somehow you'll merge somewhere here. So this could be some instruction. Okay, so now if this is the actual program flow and this is the branched out one, but then eventually they will merge somewhere. Okay, and that there could be one instruction that will definitely be executed whether the branch is taken or not. You bring that instruction and then insert it into the pipeline here, so that even whether the branch is taken or not taken, your instruction need not be flushed. Okay, so that is the idea. So technically you can actually bring in d minus 1 instructions. Okay, if you are having a delayed branch of d cycles, for example here you are delaying it by 2 cycles. Okay, so you have a delayed branch of 2 cycles, you can actually bring in one instruction. Okay, so now if you delay it by 3 cycles, then you can bring in 2 instructions. You see here, so you are actually delaying it by 3 cycles. Okay, so you can actually bring in your two, you can fill in 2 instructions until you actually decide when the branch target is calculated. Okay, so similarly if you have d delay, then you can actually bring in d minus 1 useful instructions. Okay, so how much ever you want to defer You can defer it by that extent, and then you can actually bring in those many instructions in between. Okay, is it clear? Is it clear, guys? It's simply depending on how much you want to delay. Okay, so the delay you are introducing is something like this, right? So in the absence of this I1 instruction, how much you want to delay the target. Okay, so how much you want to postpone the calculation of the target. If it is just one cycle, I mean, if it's just two cycles, okay, effectively like from your decode all the way to your storing, right? So if it is just two cycles, then you can fit in one instruction. But if you want to further postpone it, you can actually postpone it. You can actually push the target instruction to some extent. You can, if you push it, you delay it by d cycles, then you can actually bring in d minus one useful instructions. But the only problem is you have to be certain that these instructions will definitely be executed. Okay, is it clear, guys? Okay, so let's see. Let's pick someone, huh? Ujjwal. Ujjwal, are you there? Yeah, let's answer this question. Branch history is an aspect of static branch prediction or dynamic branch prediction. B, that's correct. Okay, very good, thanks, Ujjwal. Okay, branch history is an aspect of dynamic branch prediction, and static branch prediction uses only compilers. Good. Let's pick one more person. Hmm. Sindhu. Sindhu R. Sindhu R. Sindhu R is absent. This is the second or third time I'm calling out Sindhu, and both Sindhus are not responding. Sindhu J, are you there? Umang? Umang, are you there? Sindhu Umang. Hey Umang. Hey Umang, can you answer this second question? Delayed branch with 4 cycles allows to at most allows. Wow, there's something missing there. Allows these many instructions to be inserted. How many instructions does it allow to be inserted? The delay is 4 cycles. No, you're wrong. It's not C. You can ask for help. A delayed branch with D cycles is going to allow at most insertion of at most. Who else wants to try? Sindhu R. Hey, finally, Sindhu, you're here. D minus 1, which is B3, right? Very good. Thanks, Sindhu R. D minus 1 instructions to be inserted. Okay. All right. Great, great. Okay. So with this, we come to the end of this topic. Okay. There are any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, we are done. So thank you, guys. Okay. can just give your attendance.